Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, Freunde von Transmediale, Freunde von der kanadischen Botschaft. My name is David Ehinger. I'm the head of public affairs here, and I would like to welcome you. I'll be the first to welcome you this evening to the Marshall McLuhan Lecture, a now tradition of Transmediale that we're very proud of. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker this evening, who is my boss and my friend, basically Eric Walsh, who is the deputy head of mission here, standing in for Ambassador Georgios, who sends her regards. She would like to be here, but unfortunately we had a minister arrive yesterday who is still here with us, and so she's with him. Eric, if you could take the floor, please.
Thanks, David. I'm glad I'm your boss first before your friend, although we can work on that, I think. That's a sign of the relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, meine Damen und Herren, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the Canadian Embassy. Herzlich willkommen zu uns hier in der Botschaft von Kanada. Another David Orrell will be giving the Transmediale lecture shortly. Let me welcome him to the embassy. Let me also welcome Herr Kristoffer Gansing from Transmediale. Es ist mir eine besondere Freude, Sie alle heute zu der 8. Transmediale Marshall McLuhan Lecture begrüßen zu dürfen. Bienvenue à vous tous et toutes à l'ambassade du Canada. Mit der Transmediale McLuhan Lecture lädt die transmediale Persönlichkeiten der kanadischen Kulturszene ein, die in ihrer Arbeit und mit ihrem Denken Marshall McLuhans zeitloses Verständnis für Medien und Technologie aktuelle Aspekte erweitern. And tonight we are particularly honored to welcome the mathematician, Dr. David Orrell, to this year's McLuhan Lecture, as this year's McLuhan Lecturer, both to the Canadian Embassy and to Transmediale. David mentioned we have a minister in town. Ambassador Georgios would have been very happy to see you all here tonight, to see such a full room. It's ironic, actually. It's the same minister that 2 years ago prevented me from standing up here. Then he was the industry minister. Now he's the development minister. So we'll have to write a note back to the Prime Minister about this. He's going to have to pick better times to visit. But for those of us who are here tonight, David Orrell was born in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. He studied mathematics at the University of Alberta, and he obtained his doctorate from Oxford. He is the author of several popular science books, among them the bestseller Apollo's Arrow, in which he deals with the boundaries of mathematical patterns when it comes to the predictability of future events. And his most recent publication, Truth or Beauty, Science and the Quest for Order, focuses on the strained relationship between science and aesthetics. In his Transmediale McLuhan lecture tonight, Dr. Orrell will pick up on McLuhan's idea that money is a medium for social interaction. He will look at the origins of money, its oft paradoxical properties, and how it seems to have gone missing from mainstream economics. In the spirit of McLuhan, David will draw on everything from ancient philosophy to modern scientific theories in order to decode money's mysterious yet enchanting message. David, your presence here can be seen as part of a long tradition of Berlin as a place in which intellectual curiosity is encouraged and nourished. We stand here, or you sit here, I stand here, in the reconstructed heart of Berlin in a building on the site of the former Berlin Wall, a poignant symbol of repression of freedom of thought. The wall was, thankfully, a temporary 20th century aberration. Traditionally, this was a place for people with new ideas, and Berlin's institutions are resonant with the names of great thinkers who changed their world: Max Planck, Alexander von Humboldt, Albert Einstein, just to name a few. So David, welcome to Berlin, welcome to Transmediale, and we look forward to your contributions to this great tradition. Before I turn the floor over to Herr Gansing, I just want to tell you about another very exciting aspect of tonight's program. The Marshall McLuhan Salon, so just past the stairs where you came in the embassy, is once again an exhibition venue for Transmediale. This year we're presenting the exhibition Abrupt Diplomat by Canadian media artist Lorna Mills. And we would like to invite you all to join us for the opening of the exhibition after the lecture. Die Botschaft ist sehr stolz darauf, dass sie nicht nur eines der bedeutendsten Archive zu Marshall McLuhan außerhalb Kanadas besitzt, sondern dass der Salon auch immer wieder von wichtigen internationalen Festivals wie der Transmediale oder der Berlinale als Ausstellungsort genutzt wird. Finally, before closing, I want to underline the exceptional collaboration that we have had over the last 8 years with Transmediale. The Embassy is truly honored to be a partner with this outstanding and engaging festival. Vielen Dank, Transmediale. Vielen Dank, Herr Gansing. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Georgios Papadopoulos, the philosopher and Wilhelm Flusser Award winner in 2012, who will serve as our moderator tonight. Mesdames, Messieurs, je vous remercie de votre attention et vous souhaite tous une excellente soirée. Ich bedanke mich für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you very much, Deputy Ambassador Walsh, and thank you to the Canadian Embassy for again letting us having this special moment in each year's Transmediale Festival, the annual Marshall McLuhan Lecture, as was already stated, the 8th in this series. So, yes, I am Kristoffer Gansing, the artistic director of the festival. And I always tend to forget how excellent the introductions done by the staff here at the embassy for the lectures already are. So I will take the opportunity to actually then elaborate a little bit more why we chose to invite David Orrell for this year's lecture, by also talking a bit about the overall theme of this year's Transmediale Festival, which has the title Capture All. So I'll introduce that a bit, and then I will let the stage to David. And after his speech, I will introduce again Georgios, who will moderate the conversation here after the talk and also eventually open up to questions from all of you. And yeah, it's great to see again such a great turn up always for this annual lecture. Okay. Capture All, then. It's the festival that opens tomorrow. That's the title. It opens tomorrow at the Haus der Kultur in der Welt. It's looking critically at this current drive towards quantification of our society, especially as it pertains to domains of work, life, and play, 3 main sub-streams of the festival. And this is, of course, in itself not new, quantification, measurement, but we are looking at specifically how these work, life, and play fields undergo interrelated changes through what we call datafication and also different kinds of algorithmic processes connected to that. So it takes its cue, this title, from the notion of the full take, that was the collected all policy or goal of agencies like the NSA or the GCHQ, as described by Glenn Greenwald, the journalist who wrote the book No Place to Hide last year on the Snowden revelations. But rather than looking at the state of digital culture today through this prism of mass surveillance, with its polarity between freedom of the individual and the state or the big brother, Capture All implies this kind of broader take, a more overarching perspective on this technoculture drive today towards quantification, optimization, and datafication of everything, which in the end is what this idea of a full take is also ultimately depending on. So you could say that perhaps the full take is a symptom of this drive, and that even though mass surveillance is a deeply problematic phenomenon, there are further underlying questions here about what kind of culture and political models of communication and of technology that this anxiousness about surveillance, about digital surveillance, often fails to perhaps resolve or even begin to address. So, in Capture All, we dig into this thematic of quantification as such, look at it from different contemporary and historical angles. And this is also, in a way, from the side where tonight's lecture comes in, because actually what could have more to do with quantifying life than the topic, or if we should say medium, of money. So I was attending just a couple of weeks ago at Haus der Kultur in der Welt conference on from the journal Radical Philosophy. It was the German philosopher Frank Engster spoke there under the title The Condition of Acceleration, Money as a Technique of Measurement. And in his talk he described this kind of acceleration of capitalism that we are today experiencing as happening through money as a medium of quantifying time. However, it didn't mean any kind of time, but the specific abstract concept of valorized time that is in place ever since money became the way that we measure the value of labor with. Therefore, he said, if he would have written a manifesto of today's accelerationism, it would be based in an economic theory and not a political one. So I'm stressing now the importance of economics in order to introduce also again tonight's speaker, David Orrell, who is a mathematician, and we've already heard the books that he's most well known for, such as Apollo's Arrow, The Science of Prediction and the Future of Everything. I could also mention that he co-wrote a book that's published in German with Thomas Selzlasche called Bescheidenheit für eine neue Ökonomie, just I think last or 2 years ago. And in these books, Orrell combines a critique of the shortcomings of scientific modeling with a call for also complex systems theory that acknowledges the blind spots of prediction. Tonight, he will speak under the heading of Money is the Message, which picks up on this idea of McLuhan of money as a medium for social interaction. And as I said, after the talk, there will be a conversation between him and Georgios Papadopoulos. And before finally inviting you to stage, I'd like again to thank the embassy for their support, for this close cooperation on the McLuhan program this year, as every year before. There are 2 more program points. There is after the lecture, reception and opening of Lorna Mills' Abrupt Diplomat exhibition downstairs, and also a Q&A with Lorna that I'll be moderating. So you're all invited to come down there and interact with the exhibition and with us. But it will be, I should mention, on display until Sunday the 1st of February. But on Saturday, there's an additional event within the context of Lorna's participation here in the Salon program. That's the screening of Ways of Something, parts 1 and 2. That's an anthology film project curated by Lorna Mills with over 58 participating web artists in what is actually a contemporary remake of John Berger's classic BBC documentary Ways of Seeing. So that's at 4 on Saturday in the midst of the festival program here at the Embassy and the Salon. Yep. So thank you again. I will now leave the stage and give over the word to David. And very happy to also be able to probably to see you next year here at the McLuhan Lecture. And please welcome David Orrell to the 2015 Marshall McLuhan Lecture.
Thank you very much, Kristoffer, Eric, for the introductions, David. Thank you to Transmediale, everyone, and to the Canadian Embassy for inviting me to give the Marshall McLuhan Lecture this year, which for me is a great honor. I'll admit that when I first got the invitation, I didn't immediately see the connection between McLuhan's great work in media and my own work in science and economics. McLuhan's name was always in the background when I was growing up. I'm from Edmonton. McLuhan was also born in Edmonton. He was also on the examination committee for my father when he did his PhD at the University of Toronto. McLuhan passed my father, which was good. And he collaborated with a number of people at the English department where my dad worked. But I've got to admit that I was a little bit like the guy in the Woody Allen movie. I didn't know a great deal about his work, and McLuhan making this cameo appearance in Annie Hall, obviously. But in his book, so it kind of came as a bit of a revelation for me to see the degree of resonance between McLuhan's work and my own interests. In understanding media, he discusses a number of different kinds of media, including words, numbers, so on. And one of these was money, and that's the one that I wanted to follow up on today. A medium is defined as an agency or means of doing something, a means by which something is communicated or expressed, and money certainly counts as a medium by this definition. It's closely related to writing. Some of these oldest written artifacts in existence are these 5,000-year-old clay tablets, which recorded monetary transactions and debts and became a form of money in themselves. Both money and writing are means of communication that use symbols to describe the world. And just as different languages use different words for the same thing, so many things have served as money. Mr. McLuhan noted the concept of currency has become increasingly abstract. From coin to paper currency and from currency to credit card, there is a steady progression toward commercial exchange as the movement of information itself. So all sorts of things have served as money, as I said, from cowrie shells in ancient China to cigarettes in post-war Germany. But today it's this virtual ethereal form of money, which McLuhan was talking about, which underpins modern capitalism, and its pursuit determines much of the structure of our lives. Jobs are often seen largely as a means to obtain it. Houses are seen not just as homes, but as stores of wealth. Money-based metrics such as net worth for a person or gross domestic product for a country serve as scorekeeping devices. And indeed, money for many people is not just a necessity, but it's actually become something a bit more like a religion. The British Museum in a book noted that money has become the main motivating factor behind Western culture. And they talk about this fetishistic attitude in the sense that it attributes a quasi-supernatural quality to the object of its adulatory devotion. So money is very important, but despite its importance and the long history of our relationship with it, we don't seem to know money very well. In fact, we seem a little bit clueless about it in some respects. An example of this was the credit crunch in 2007, which kicked off the financial crisis. And this was just one of a long series of such events which are caused in large part by the dynamics of money and our inability to understand those dynamics. And like those other events, it was largely unpredicted. So we often appear to be as helpless in the face of these sort of financial storms as our ancestors were to more natural cataclysms. Another example is, of course, is the euro. So, in theory, a commonly held currency is seen as a unifying force, which bonds people together like a shared national anthem. But in Europe, the euro has, in some respects, had the opposite effect, kind of enhancing the differences, for example, between North and South, between Greeks and Germans. I'm not trying to start anything here. But society is increasingly polarized by these sort of force fields of money, and indeed money often seems to have a way of pulling people apart, both globally and even within a single country. So a defining feature of modern capitalism is extreme wealth inequality. Oxfam recently released a report showing that the top 1% of the world population controls about 50% of the world's entire wealth. And to be in that 1%, I should say that you need to have about 700,000 euros, so you don't actually need to look like this guy here. So we don't really understand money, and surprisingly perhaps, economic theory, or at least sort of mainstream economic theory, is not a great deal of help. Most of the models used by economists and policymakers do not take money explicitly into account. In fact, as Mervyn King said, most economists hold conversations in which the word money hardly appears at all. So this might seem like a bit of a provocative statement, so I'll come back and talk about that in more detail later. But money is like oxygen, so it's a substance which surrounds us. It's usually invisible, but it's vital for our survival and is also potentially explosive. So in this talk, it's in parts. The first part I'm going to talk about the origins of money, where it came from, then say something about its properties, why its behavior is so hard to understand and predict, and then some thoughts about where it is going in the future. So everything about money that you might ever want to know, except how to actually make it. I'm afraid I don't know too much about that. Okay, so the origins of money. If you take a look at a modern textbook, so this is from the 13th edition of a best-selling Canadian textbook, and it says, I won't read the whole thing, but basically it says that if you didn't have money, you have to do exchanges by barter. This is difficult because it relies on a coincidence that each person has to want what the other person has if you want to arrange a trade. So as a result, commodities such as gold and silver, metals began to be used. And then sort of at the end of this, they realized that if the state came along and put a stamp on it, which would certify the weight of the metal, that would be a great convenience and kind of speed the whole thing up. So the same summary that money emerges from barter with a stamp just playing kind of the role of an added convenience at the end is featured in just about every textbook. But if you ask what are the sources for this, well, some of it, the idea of the double coincidence, goes back to William Stanley Jevons. Carl Menger wrote a similar account. A bit further back, Adam Smith filled out the story with little vignettes from what was thought at the time to be the case of North American Indians. But if you trace the origin all the way back, it actually goes back to Aristotle, who wrote something very similar in politics. In fact, even the sort of the language is quite close. He said that money grew, coin money grew, as might have been inferred out of barter, because it was intrinsically useful to carry around some metal as something like a commodity as a medium of exchange. At first, they just used the commodity, but then it was realized that it would be more convenient and it would save a great deal of trouble if somebody put a stamp on it certifying the weight. So that's sort of the conventional idea about money, if you like. But then the economist Alfred Mitchell Innes came along with a bombshell. He said that modern research has brought to light a massive evidence which was not available to these earlier economists, and in the light of which it may be positively stated that none of these theories are true, that in fact they're false. So I should point out that by modern research, this book was written in 1913, so over 100 years ago. Anthropologists have shown that these sort of barter economies never really existed. And as people, including David Graeber in his book Debt, the First 5,000 Years, wrote, money has actually emerged from credit systems rather than from barter. And the best documented such system is that of the Sumerians in Mesopotamia. So their economy was dominated by these temples and palaces. And then around 3500 BC, accountants began to use a shekel of silver basically as a kind of an accounting device. So the actual metal, the silver, did not have to circulate. So people weren't kind of paying each other with silver. It was kept in vaults. And most market dealings were done on the basis of credit. And this is so they recorded them on these clay tablet cuneiforms, and the debts would be settled later with barley or other commodities. So the role of the shekel was really a sort of a valuing thing. And these cuneiforms could also be traded, actually, sort of like endorsed checks. They really were kind of like a form of money. So the point is that money grew out of this virtual credit system. The first actual coins came quite a bit later in the 7th century BC. They're from the kingdom of Lydia, and these were made from a naturally occurring gold-silver alloy called electrum. So these were pretty big coins. The largest was worth about a month's salary. Even the very smallest coins could have fed a worker for a few days. So, which raises the question what they were actually for, because this doesn't seem kind of too convenient for everyday purchases. And it seems that the main motivation, really, certainly for the spread of coin money in ancient Greece, because it did catch on very quickly, appears to have been the needs of the military, which was the state's largest expense. So the state paid a salary to the military. The military used those coins to pay suppliers, and then the coins recycled back to the state in the form of taxes. So basically, this was kind of a clever way of provisioning the troops. Now, of course, money is an explosively powerful social technology, and its adoption changed all aspects of life and sort of kind of went beyond this role. But the point is that rather than emerging naturally from barter, it was actually forced and imposed, at the sharp end of a sword. So this changes our view of money. And it raises some questions. So, for example, why is it that we conventionally treat money, at least in textbooks, as if it is a commodity like any other, whose only special property is that it is useful for facilitating barter? Is a stamp just a great convenience, or is it more than that? Why is money presented as an inert medium of exchange? How does money relate to issues of things like power, politics, history, psychology, gender, economics, ethics, the environment, and so on? Why do our textbooks still sound a lot like Aristotle when they talk about money? Textbooks have moved on in other areas. Physics textbooks don't sound like Aristotle anymore. And finally, what is money? It seems to be an interesting medium, so what are its properties? Well, the conventional answer to that question would be money is conventionally defined as something that serves as a medium of exchange, a store of wealth, and a unit of account. The last two of these are actually rather problematic, and maybe come back to that later. But mainstream economists have tended to focus on the first of these. As Paul Samuelson said, what is money? Money is anything that serves as a commonly accepted medium of exchange. So it could be absolutely anything. It doesn't really have special properties in particular. And this is consistent with the idea that money is a kind of commodity that serves to facilitate barter. But we know that money originated really from a system for managing debts. So is money best seen as a physical commodity, which is a measure of positive wealth, or as a negative debt? Well, I'm going to risk a rather McLuhan-esque sounding definition here, which is that money is a technology that mediates between number and the fuzzy concept of real-world value. So money is transmitted by money objects such as coins, notes, or electronic transfers, just as magnetism is transmitted by virtual photons. And I say that because if you look at the way the matter operates on the nature of subatomic particles, particles kind of communicate forces with one another by exchanging virtual photons and virtual particles, which kind of flash in and out of existence very quickly. So that's why they're called virtual. But the thing is, they kind of lob these virtual particles back and forth. And that's how communication is done at the fundamental level of matter. And it's a bit like if you have a kid, and you throw a ball to the kid, and then the kid hopefully throws the ball back to you, and you catch it. And it's a kind of a communication. And so this is how money works. It's by the exchange of these money objects. And these money objects have both a physical aspect and a virtual number aspect. So the stamp is very important. So you can see that here. This is what a typical example of a money object. And here it defines something to be 1. So there's a 1, a written 1, and a number 1 in each corner. So that's 8 ones in the corners. And then it says $1 at the bottom and another 1 in the middle. So that's altogether 10 ones. And then on the other side of the note, there's another 5 ones. So there's actually 15. So it's being very insistent about this, the fact that this is 1, right? So this stamp appears to play an important role. So to understand this idea of mediating between number and the real world, I think it helps to go back to the philosophers who were plying their trade at exactly the same time. The coin money was beginning to emerge in ancient Greece. Pythagoras, best understood as a predecessor of Marshall McLuhan. They actually have quite a lot in common. He was considered a demigod by his followers, in this case by Apollo. He was named after the Pythia, the oracle, so his name means the oracle speaks. He was probably involved in the development of local coinage. It's said that he derived his enthusiasm for the study of number from its practical applications in commerce. The Pythagoreans, as his followers were known, are best known for their theory about right triangles. But really, their most important discovery was about music. They found that music is governed in a way by mathematical laws, by mathematical ratios. So if you take a string on a lyre or a guitar or something, you pluck it, you get a note, and then if you fret it exactly halfway up and you pluck it, you get a note which is an octave higher, and then it turns out that all the notes which harmonize well together are related by these simple mathematical relationships, these ratios. So this was an astonishing discovery because music was considered the most mysterious of art forms and powerful of art forms. And the fact that it be kind of reduced to number in some way suggested to the Pythagoreans that perhaps this was the foundation of the universe, that number is a kind of a universal medium. Now, the Pythagorean philosophy was inherently dualistic, which often seems to be the case when you bring number into the picture. And it was summarized by a list of 10 opposites, which I think is a very interesting list in a number of ways. It's a bit like yin-yang, with yang being the left-hand column, yin being the right-hand column. But there's an important difference, which is that the Pythagoreans associated the left column with good and the right column with evil. I think that this list has served as a kind of an aesthetic key for science and economics. So if you take a look at some things like one versus plurality, the idea of unity, the search for unified theories is very important in science. At rest versus in motion is about stability. Straight versus crooked is about linearity. Light versus darkness, light is the light of reason. Symmetry is square versus oblong. And these principles of symmetry, unity, stability, linearity, all of these things are very important in science. And as we'll see, but they also play a key role in economics. In fact, I would say that a large amount of economics is actually based on aesthetics. And this list also resonates with Marshall McLuhan's idea of visual versus acoustic media. So some list of opposites taken from paper about his work. Closed versus open is like limited versus unlimited. Particle versus field. I'm going to talk a bit about that one later. Container versus network. Left brain, right brain. So left brain controls the right side of the body and vice versa. So it's like right versus left. Vertical versus horizontal. Static versus dynamic is the same as at rest versus in motion. Linear versus nonlinear is the same as straight versus crooked. And then visual versus acoustic is like light